Well, as part of the response to that, the government 3 days ago announced, I know it seems risible, that in some schools in New Zealand, teacher-pupil ratios would fall. They made a big announcement of this. Chris Hipkins, the Prime Minister, and the Minister of Education, Jan Tinetti, herself a former primary school principal, made an announcement at Remuera Intermediate. I know at school holidays there was a certain irony there, that they were reducing teacher-pupil ratios from 1 to 28 to 1 to 27 or 1 to 29 to 1 to 28. I don't know, but it certainly worked out that only about a quarter of schools in New Zealand would be affected by this policy. Yesterday, they went one step further. Well, if you like. They've suggested that NCEA, or the changes that they're going to make to it, would be delayed whilst they concentrate on, well, upping and upskilling kids in basic reading and literacy and numeracy skills. To talk us through this, what it all means, whether or not it's going to make a blind bit of difference, is one of New Zealand's foremost education consultants, a former school principal himself, Alwyn Poole. And Alwyn joins us now. Alwyn, thank you for waiting. What do you make of yesterday, first of all? And could you explain to our listeners what actually the government did announce yesterday?
I'll do my best. Morning, Michael. So the sort of background to this, I think you've been very accurate about, kind of the decline. I'm a bit worried that you mentioned the 1980s. Well, that's when I was at school, so please don't blame it all on me. Yes, our results for numeracy and literacy for science have been declining for a significant period of time. But keep in mind that we had never in our education history kept data for our year 9 and 10 students. Even national standards, as faulty as it was, it didn't extend to year 9 and 10. So Chris Hipkins had been, in opposition as the education spokesperson for 9 years. Now, for other Labour MPs coming in, you can argue that they were a surprise government and they hadn't really got, things organised. There was no excuse for Hipkins. He should have known stuff off the bat, and yet he also put in all of these kind of, I don't know what you call them, advisory groups or, group think panels. And one led by Barley Hart came back and had a whole range of changes. Pretty much very few of those had been implemented. Other people in kind of more highly performing schools, really, and the universities put a lot of pressure on for these numeracy and literacy co-credits to be introduced to more readily guarantee that the students who are leaving school with qualifications are actually numerate and literate. Now, that sounds completely ridiculous because you would expect that someone with NCEA level 1, 2 or 3 could actually be functionally numerate and literate, but it turns out that that's not true. So they said, okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to design these co-credits, we're going to introduce them, and then this will lift our standards and this will improve what the universities are getting in terms of students coming to them as being more numerate and literate. And they did nothing. So people were beavering away in the NZQA designing these numeracy and literacy co-credits, which were a pretty good idea, designing them. Schools that were, more astute and took the ministry and the minister at his word, got their teaching and learning organised, and that they were supposed to be compulsory this year. Then people thought, well, we better test and see how these kids do against the test. And they did appallingly. And suddenly Labor had realised, probably within the last 2 months even, that what was going to happen if they were compulsory next year is that instead of 13% of our leavers not having, a level 1 leavers not having NCEA, it could go up to 50% and 90% for Decile 1 schools. Now, whose fault is that? It sits very firmly with Minister Hipkins, because he put the tests in place and failed to put the program for numeracy and literacy effectively into schools. So it's kind of like
ask, Alwyn, can I ask a question just at that point though? 13% of people who go to school, or kids that go to school, fail level 1, which is, is as basic as you can get level 1. So if you're failing level 1,
they'd leave without level 1. So
yeah, I mean, it's almost impossible to fail. That's right, but it's almost impossible to fail level 1 because the standard's so low, and the way in which you can get the credits to get there is so comparatively easy. What you're saying to me is that these new literacy and numeracy tests, just to check whether or not kids can actually read and write and add a few things, that the new tests would suggest that number would go up to half of all students in our year 11 classes and 90% of all our Decile 1 schools. Is that what you said?
Absolutely. Even in the most recent test released, it showed 58% passed the reading section, down from 64%. 57% passed numeracy, an improvement from 56%. Whoopee crap. And the writing still a lot lower than that. And so keep in mind that some kids will succeed in one or the other and things like that. So when you aggregate it out, they are finding that half of our level 1 students could not do these tests and would fail.
Incredible. Now, when we talk about these tests, one of the things that I expected to hear when we had these tests, Alwyn, was that there'd be a pushback saying, the tests are too hard, or you've tested the wrong thing. I've seen a little bit of that from some educational professionals, which is always the answer to everything. You've asked the wrong question. Is the teaching profession pushing back, arguing that, or is it just a few isolated union leaders?
Well, I think the unions are, significantly at fault here too. But the schools in and of themselves, so you mentioned the amount of time your daughter has already missed at school just this year. Well, over the last 2 or 3 years, including this year, schools have had what they called accord days, teacher-only days, on top of their normal teacher-only days to actually prepare for all of this. And so you will have a portion of our schools that, as I say, have taken the government at their word and have organised their school, organised their teachers, used their teacher-only days for professional development, not going to the beach, and they're ready to go. And that's what being professional in education is about. And then you'll have others who have wrung their hands and said, well, the test's too hard. Now, I think a very valid criticism of tests. I don't think they should be online. I think it completely changes the way that you address an assessment, and that we haven't come to terms with what that means yet. But that's a pretty minor change. And then yes, you've had others who have said, well, this is too hard for our kids, and we won't be able to get them up to speed. Well, you're a teacher. It's a school. That's your job. Do your job. And so, yeah, there's a mix of responsibility, but you've got the top job for a reason. And I would imagine on Monday that when sort of Jantinetti was rolled out for this, false, faux reduction in class sizes, that she pretty much said to Hipkins, well, mate, all of this, or most of this, is on you. You need to be at the announcement too, because I'm not taking it all.
All right. We know things are bad, and they've got worse. The government's made these two announcements, one around teacher class ratio, we'll come to that in a second, and also deferring the NCEA changes to make sure that they can concentrate on literacy and numeracy. My wife made the point, she's not an education person. She said, I passed school cert, but she looked at me last night as she was looking at the news, and I imagine she would be the reaction of most New Zealanders. She said, how do they expect to arrest in a year literacy and numeracy failures that have been 7-8 years in the making? And I looked at her and I said, darling, I can't answer that question. What is the answer to that question?
Well, first of all, there does have to be a long-term vision. And how have we got to this point and what we can do about it, which I believe involves a massive partnership with parents and the education sector, pretty much beginning from when a child's conceived. So we've got to have a long-term vision. And we know what we ought to be doing, but a lot of that isn't happening. But then the second thing I would say to your lovely wife is that they've actually had nearly 6 years to put all of this in place. And so it's not just a year, it's not them going, oh my goodness, we've just found out. They should have known that the car was broken and needed to be repaired 6 years ago, and they could have made a heck of a lot more progress than they've made. And don't forget, I mean, this is effectively a 2-year delay again before it's compulsory, and many schools where the kids are doing well, etc., they will take this on next year, and suddenly what Taniti did yesterday was just further entrench our multi-tiered education system.
Yes, and that's the point that Professor Rata from Auckland University Education Department has made as well. She is saying to us that there actually isn't a curriculum. There is, that is you'd think was going to be taught straight across every school in New Zealand at both primary and secondary level. But particularly at primary level, her argument was that schools and school teachers have so much discretion that they can interpret what the curriculum means and teach something as different as one classroom for another being next door. Those children will be receiving a different form of teaching and actually a different curriculum. Is that right?
Yes, it is. And one of the good things, and let me say, I promise I'll never join a political party, etc., but I think Erica Stanford has been onto a lot of this stuff very effectively and has spoken to the right people, such as Elizabeth Rata and all sorts of others, and she's been really prepared to go out and listen to people. I think she'll be an excellent Minister of Education, because one of the things that she is noting already is that we have such a range of abilities, particularly in our primary school teaching, and we have so many teachers who will say they are not confident in teaching mathematics and science. And so she's realising that, well, goodness, one of the keys therefore is that these people need to be upskilled, and when our teachers are graduating, they need to sit competency tests in math and science. So, yeah, I mean, Elizabeth is exactly right, and I'd have to say Professor Rata is a remarkable New Zealander, and well done for engaging.
All right, going forward, I would imagine education, no, it is. It's going to be a critical, well, I don't know if it's going to be a voting issue, given that you've got the cost of living out there. I think you're right about Erica Stanford. I've said this publicly, and I'll say it again. I'm looking at who should be the leader of the National Party, just between you and me. She's done an extremely good job. And listen, if she was, we wouldn't even be talking about this election. It would be all over, bar the shouting. But the thing that I'm interested in now is the resistance from school teachers and teacher unions, Alwyn, seems to be a good part of the problem. They don't like testing full stop. And then that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, Alwyn, teacher unions and a number of teachers, politicised enough to be able to comment publicly, say that how do you measure success anyhow? That sort of philosophical view is bloody hard to try and get some change from, isn't it?
It does make it difficult, and I have to also call into question the competence and the perspective of the teacher unions. And as you said earlier on, do you call it a monologue in your monologue? That when NCEA and PPTA are saying all they're doing is for the kids, it is complete nonsense. And with this round of looking for pay increases and things like that, these people started negotiating in last May. And, I mean, between the ministry and themselves, they haven't been able to come to a reasonable agreement during, well, almost the entire time the platform's been up and running. And how do you measure success? Well, there are a range of ways to measure success within our New Zealand system. I mean, I guess beginning from how many PhD students we're producing, how many master's students, degree students, in what areas, how many students got UE. Is that a valid measure of being a successful student? Well, if it isn't, or level 3 NCEA isn't, what do we need to put into it? Well, we need really solid units in numeracy and literacy. And that's how you measure success in education. Are there other things to be concerned about, like student well-being, like pathways for students? I would not say who don't have the ability to go into these other areas, but who don't have the desire. They want to work in other areas. They really like the look of the trades or entrepreneurship or things like that. I mean, there are ways of measuring success in all of those things. The only people who don't want to measure success are the people who realise that it will show up your lack of competence.
I think that last assessment is spot on, Alwyn, and is the problem. And it's going to take some serious political heft and direction, and frankly, some balls and some courage to be able to change that. But you are a good part of providing that. Thank you very much. That's Alwyn Poole.